We've already detailed the forced and mass migration of Africans to the United States for slavery purposes, but after Civil War, when slavery was ended, you saw a mass migration that was voluntary of African Americans moving to the industrial north, represented by those arrows, but also those orange circles, which shows increasing population. And it makes sense. What was happening? The plantation south was collapsing. There was no jobs. Lots of the industry was thriving in the north. Further, if you were enslaved, if your generations were enslaved, you wouldn't want to stick around. So a lot of people were wanting to get the hell out of the South and move to the North. And so these various reasons caused the Great Migration. And then after World War II, you saw another mass migration of African Americans. And so you saw continued migration from the South to the industrial North, but also more migration to the coast. Now, over time, African Americans, as more and more generations were born, started to change their migration patterns. And so I've already mentioned that movement to urban areas beyond the East. But you did see a return migration, especially here in this particular area of the South that I just highlighted. So what's going on there was a lot of them were great-grandchildren who are just returning back to homes in which they already had families living there. So one of the outcomes of the Civil War was a lot of these plantations essentially were divided up until you had what we call sharecroppers. Essentially what it is a person who works a field, rented from a landowner, and then pays the rent or pays loans by turning over their share of the land back to the landowner. And so whatever they earn from the crops that are on their little parcel of land, they then make money on it, but they also they give it to their landlord, to the plantation owner. And so that was economic opportunity. And so when we look at the American South today, we see a large number of rural African Americans. A lot of this can be related to that return migration. And these are generations after those first groups that first off migrated back in the late 1800s after the Civil War. We see return migration that's continued to happen over time. These migration, like I said, Atlanta overwhelmingly is a destination. We see a lot of return migrants, especially during this 1940-1970 period.